So here we go. So challenging conversation for sure, and it doesn't necessarily have to be. And I know a lot of those of you out here watching either live or will watch this later are interested in how to make these types of conversations move from taboo or challenging, difficult, uncomfortable. Anyone as an adult child now with your parents, was it challenging? Did you have the conversation? Did you have the conversation about the birds and the bees? Did you figure it out? We've talked about that. Certainly how our own sexual narrative and how that was crafted moving through life. Yeah. I know mine was very typical for a lot of folks. I had about a 10-minute conversation with my dad. I was 12 or 13 years old. It was incredibly uncomfortable. He and I did not have sit down, emotionally charged conversations anyway. So to then introduce some things that I was uncomfortable with at the time, that I was actually shameful about, like sex, what is it? We don't talk about it, right? And for whatever reason, we needed to sit down at the kitchen table. I'll never forget it. It was during the day. I think it was on a Saturday. It was about 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. And we sat down at the kitchen table. It was just him and I, and it was a challenge for my dad to communicate any type of depth anyway, but then to bring up sex and how to do it and how not to do it. I don't even remember the conversation, to be honest with you. I just remembered how uncomfortable I was. Anybody relate to that? Yes. Hello, Samantha. Hi, Jen. Thanks for jumping on. Yeah. So we're going to dive into that to provide some support, some insight, some hacks as far as communicating sex with your kids. Now, some of you may be thinking, oh, I have adult children and this is really not appropriate for me. It's no longer valuable. I would challenge that perspective in that we can still have conversations with our 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds, right? If we're in that season of life, and conversations with children about sex, there really is no age limit, okay? And I'm going to dive into that a little bit. So whether you have children who were just born, right, or you have adult children and everybody in between, I think this conversation is super important for all of us to dive into. And I would invite questions, comments, always. I want these DLea DLayered to be conversational. So please jump on. If you've got comments, perspectives, stories, perhaps, I would love to hear them and to share them here in the stream. So let's jump in here. So what's important to understand about conversations about sex with your kids is it's framed with your thought, story, history about sex, right? So much of what you're going to bring into conversations about sex with your children has everything to do with how you view sex, right? So your story, your narrative, how you engage in sex, how you talk about sex, perhaps with a spouse, right? Good friends, is going to help provide a framework for how you communicate with your kids. So keep that in mind here as we jump in here. Also, it's important to know that you communicating with your kids about sex is something they want and they need. I would invite you to consider that this is a conversation they desire, they want, they need. In fact, I would offer the perspective that the parents are the primary provider of sexual education for children, for their children, right? So much we place it perhaps on school, sex ed class, right? Or we leave it to the friends, right? Anyone taught about sex by their friends, or maybe pornography, right? We've talked about this on DLea DLayered, where those types of educations come from. I would invite you to consider that it is super important to be the primary educator when it comes to sex with your children. They want to know and learn from you. And I know this can be super challenging. It can be so uncomfortable, especially if you did not receive a really, really firm, educational, strong, confident, open, curious sexual relationship as far as conversation with your parents, right? It can directly then go down generation after generation. So I would invite us to consider to break those chains generationally and provide an open forum about sex within the family. All right. I'm going to speak to dads for just a moment because I am one. I have 3 amazing souls that call me dad. And I will speak specifically to the dads. Dads, It's super important that both your sons, daughters, okay, maybe it has nothing to do with gender, okay, but that they get and receive a masculine perspective when it comes to sex, right? This is not a conversation to be left to mom. And so often that happens, right? And it probably speaks a lot to our emotional, us men, our emotional capacity to communicate, right? So I'm going to challenge all of us dads on the call to step into this. And I'm going to provide some thoughts, tools, strategies as we move through this today. So dads, it's super important. It's super important that you are a vital, vital, vital leader in these conversations about sex with your children. Okay, cool. Good with that? I'm leaning in. Do you hear me? All right. So, and lastly, and then we're going to jump into some to-dos. Remember that as a parent, you're the first introduction about sex with your child. Okay. Whether you engage with appropriate conversations, education about sex with your children, they again want it from you, and you potentially could be the most important and impactful voice in all areas of life, and so important when it comes to sex. All right. If you are ashamed of sex and tabooed conversations and not sure what to say and embarrassed, or I should say shamed about sex, that's going to come through your communication, right? Certainly that was my story. All right. So let's jump in here. I will say this, ladies and gentlemen, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, okay? It's never too early to begin conversations about sex with your children, right? And one phrase that I want to bring forth to consider as we move through here is to replace the phrase age appropriate with mature appropriate. Okay? I'm gonna let that sink in for just a moment. Mature appropriate rather than age appropriate, right? Those of you who are parents who have multiple children probably can realize and understand this concept that you have a child who is more mature at a certain age than another child was mature at a certain age, right? Maturity levels have really nothing to do with chronological age. Let's be very clear about that. Wouldn't you agree, right? Certainly have met some folks who are 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, and oh my goodness, what an old soul they were, had this experience. And then I've met 50-year-old individuals who couldn't get out of their own way, right? And I think it's important to provide this framework when it comes to talking about sex with your children, is that an 8-year-old may be able to, quote, handle something that a 15-year-old still cannot. So that's why it's so important not to put rules and regulations on what is age appropriate on how to communicate about sex with your children. It's really your judgment, your discernment on what each individual child can, quote, handle, receive in a way. And again, how you bring that information is so important about your sexual narrative, your story, that you bring forth information, ask for questions, open to the questions that your children bring to you with a level of curiosity, receptivity, validation, invitation, right? Because how you respond to someone's question, how you respond to your children's question when it deals with sex is incredibly important to understand that they really, really, really want to know. And they're waiting and they're watching to see how you're going to respond. If we respond with levels of shame and we shouldn't talk about this, or perhaps there's shame involved with your sexual story, okay, it's super important that we become confident in our own sexual narrative so we can bring forth that confidence for our kids. Cool? Understand? Got it? Yeah, thumbs up? Great. All right. So moving on. When the questions, and I just touched on this, when the questions do come, and they will, right? The questions about sex will come, right? That we are incredibly open to whatever they have to say, right? And the questions may appear to be odd or off, okay? They may be in areas that you've never even considered potentially for yourself, that you didn't experience in how you grew up. And I will tell you, friends, right? Today is wide open, right? Our children have the opportunity to learn about just about anything at any moment, at any time, right? And they will. And wouldn't it be amazing if they came to you for clarification as opposed to their buddies in the locker room, right? The kids on the playground, right? Pornography, perhaps. Okay. I have this in my notes. Treat those questions when they do come about sex. Treat them as they're questions similar to, hey, if your child walks up and starts talking about the weather, the dog, a toy, right? That we have this consistent receptivity, this interaction with our children, and that sex is simply just one more thing that they jump into, right? Make sense? Cool. All right. Your best initiation in receiving your children with openness and receptivity is ensuring that you're confident and curious about your own sexual story. We have said this a couple of times, right? I have a brief story about my middle child, Jaden. He was about 3 or 4 years old, very young. And I'll never forget, he walked right into the bedroom in the middle of the day, right? Absolutely was not prepared for what was about to be said. And this is what he said: "Dad, tell me again how babies are made." And without skipping a beat, or at least I hoped I did, right? I said, well, it's when a man places his penis inside a woman's vagina. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, okay." Turned around and walked away. That was it. That's all he needed. He needed his dad to simply repeat the nuts and bolts, pun intended, of how sex works. We didn't need to go into all of the details about sexual activity and foreplay and masturbation and ejaculation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For a 4-year-old mind, that's all he wanted to know. He wanted to know how things happen. He was satisfied with the answer and he walked out of the bedroom. Okay? How I received him was super important. If I would have gasped, right? If I would have been, "Oh, no, that's not appropriate," or "Go ask your mom," right? That could have said something to him that says, "Oh, this conversation is not appropriate. My dad's not comfortable with this. Ooh, that's weird. That's awkward." Okay. Thirdly, wherever we are, parents, I would highly encourage you to use terms, especially when they are mature, younger, right, that are clinical and real. Okay. That we avoid using euphemisms. I know that we consistently grow up in that type of thing and use words to describe sexual body parts or body parts in general, or sexual acts, right, that have little to do with the anatomical clinical names. And for a child, it's important to know that they're going to learn all the buzzwords that we tend to use as adults. Okay? But it's super important that we use the words that those body parts were defined as. I have a funny story for you right here. I had a friend 20 some years ago. We were raising young kids together and we were having this conversation about talking about sex, body parts to our children. And this is what she said. And they had 4 girls potentially, and a son. And this is what she said. She said, "We tell our girls that we call the vagina the pumpkin." And I remember stopping and laughing. I said, "Pumpkin? So you call the vagina, the vulva, a pumpkin?" And of course, my sarcastic mind quickly goes to, and I said, "So what happens around Halloween when you go and carve the pumpkin?" Oh, I've never forgotten that, right? Carve the pumpkin. We're calling the vagina, the vulva, a pumpkin. Now, I don't know what happened, right, to those girls and what they thought about vaginas and fruits and vegetables and Halloween. I don't know how that went, but I think it's an important story to know. Hey, let's call it what it is, right? Pumpkin. You can take that one. All right. All right. I'm going to speak specifically to dads about daughters and moms about sons. I think it's important to become educated about the specificity of the other body parts. Especially dads. I'm leaning in again. Dads, be aware of this. Be aware of this. Hello, Denise. Thanks for jumping on. By the way, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, okay, I'd love to see them here in the chat. So, dads, it's important to learn about the female anatomy. Yes, you might be thinking, yes, I know all about the female anatomy. Okay, that's how these kids came to us. But there's so much more to learn, right? About menstruation, about shaving, right? About clitoris, about vulva, about vagina, right? All of these things, like what is really going on when breasts are full during menstruation? How does that feel? What about nipples? All these things that we are not taught as men, it's important that we educate ourselves. So if you are married, talk to your wife about this. What can you provide? Again, mature appropriate, not age appropriate information for your daughters. It's important. And it provides them a level of comfort, an appropriate level of comfort to come to you with questions. And it's okay that they come to you with questions. My daughter, right, came to me with questions, and I tried my best to be open, curious, mindful, invitational, and I validated her questions about menstruation, period, all types of things. Okay. And I will speak to moms too. Learn it's not just his penis. Okay. It's not just his scrotum. There's a lot going on there. Okay. There's a lot going on, especially when boys move into seasons of masturbation, right? That mom, we take it with stride, right? It's part of growing up, and that we receive that and we leave the shame outside the door. Okay. So there's lots to learn that goes beyond just the mechanical aspects of sex, mom, dad, that it's important that our children know that we know and are confident and comfortable about their bodies. Right? This also provides us an opportunity to talk about body image, especially for girls in our society, right? It's so super important. And what I will say too, dads, okay, her body image, your daughter's body image, okay, will be in a lot of ways determined by how you receive her. Okay. Because you are her first experience with a masculine perspective about her. Okay. Right. So again, appropriately complimenting her, no matter what, right? It has little to do with her size, right? This is all part of sexual education. Right? This is all how she is going to be received by the men in her life down the road. It's how you receive her when she's a child. Super important. Okay. And lastly, and then we'll move into some key concepts and close up for today. Y'all with me? Y'all here? Y'all good? Hello, Esmeralda. Good to see you. Thanks for jumping on. I would invite you, again, mature appropriate. I would invite you, moms and dads, to share your sexual experiences with your children. What? What did David just say? Did he say, talk to your children and tell them about your sexual exploits? Yes. Again, mature, appropriate. All right. Your children want to know that you are normal, that you experience sexual activity, that you experience sexual pleasure. Again, mature, appropriate. They want to know about the mistakes you made. They want to know about the silliness that's behind it. They want to know that sex is normal. They want to know that sex is pleasurable, and that mom and dad engage in this, because they're going to someday. I got news for you, mom, dad, it's going to happen. This is something really important that I forgot to say at the top of our little DLea DLayered. Dads especially, but moms too. Okay? Know that your children are going to engage in sexual activity down the road. I know that's difficult for some of us dads, especially with daughters, right? That we think, I don't even want to think about it. I don't even want to think about the fact that my daughter is going to enjoy, more than likely, sex, have an orgasm with a man. Very true. It's going to happen. Moms, your little baby boy is going to invite a woman into a sexual experience. Okay. Newsflash. It's going to happen. So the more that we're comfortable with that at an early age, knowing, right, that children are not tiny little people, they're future adults. And again, mature, appropriate. That's why it is important to share your own personal sexual experiences with your children. Again, mature, appropriate. Right. One more way to build intimacy with your children, build rapport, allow them to know that you're just like them, right? That provides a level of connectivity. Because if you come into it with, hey, we don't talk about my experiences with sex, okay? It can put walls between you on these levels, okay? Again, I urge you to consider what mature appropriate means when sharing your sexual narrative with your children, okay? Again, she needs to know, he needs to know, your children need to know that you are human and how they can relate to you in this way. All right, so key concepts, takeaways. Here we go. Ready? If you're taking notes, here we go. Hello, Nancy. Good to see you. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for jumping on. All right. Again, remember, mature appropriate rather than age appropriate when having conversations about sex with your kids. Okay? And again, you determine that. And each child, if you have multiple children, you'll need to decide that for each child. Sometimes children are ready to have certain conversations at 5, and sometimes they're not ready till 9 or 10, and only you, as the parent, knowing them the best on how that's going to be handled. Mature appropriate rather than age appropriate. I would invite you to begin to replace that language. All right. Instead of age appropriate, we leverage mature appropriate. Secondly, your sexual comfort level will help shape and become their sexual comfort level. It not necessarily defines them. Okay. We can't destroy them or hurt them beyond repair. Right? But we can provide an incredible amount of openness, curiosity, healthy viewpoints about sex if we, as adults, as parents, are comfortable about our own sexuality. Important. And what's important to know, again, mature, appropriate, as we communicate about sex with our children, is that we frame sex as, and I have it written down, that's why I'm looking at my notes. Sex is wonderful, beautiful, pleasurable, magical, a gift of the heart, of our mind, body, soul. It's an experience. It's a sharing. It's a gift. It's one of the most remarkably beautiful, pleasurable experiences we can have in life. And I would invite us to consider and treat it as such with our children. Cool? Awesome? Good? Fantastic. Thank you so much for jumping on. That's what I have for you today. Talking sex with your kids. We are here every Tuesday and Thursday, ladies and gentlemen. These segments we call DLea DLayered, as we delayer so much of the complexities of life, leadership, relationships. If you're interested in knowing more about what we do in providing ongoing support to high-achieving professional men and women in all facets of life as they transition, if you're looking for more, right? If you want to know more about having conversations with your children, check out what we're doing. We're on all the socials. daring-deeply.com is the website. You can send me a message here in the comments. Would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching today live. And for those of you that will be on here later on the replay, these will also be uploaded to the new YouTube channel, Daring Deeply on YouTube. You can find us there. I encourage you to jump on there and catch some of the videos from the prior broadcasts. Thanks so much for jumping on, my friends. Again, David Lee signing off, DLea DLayered with Daring Deeply. Lots of D's. Have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday, friends. Take care. Bye-bye.